So it's a warm welcome to our webinar this afternoon for the Performance Coach on three-way contracting for coaches. So I'm Damien Wamfor. I'm one of the partners at the Performance Coach in our UK office. I must apologise for my voice this afternoon. I'm afraid I'm suffering with a bit of a sore throat, but I hope it won't be too much of an interference for either of us. The session today will be around about 40 minutes in length. We would really encourage you to have a pen and paper handy, because I will be asking you to reflect on your practice as a coach during this session. The only other piece of housekeeping really is to just ask if you can close down any applications you may have open, only because this will interfere with the transmission speed from time to time as well. So the session today is really a reflective piece for you in terms of your development as a coach. These webinars are aligned with the agenda and curriculum of our coach training courses. So if you are working with us at the moment, we hope this is a valuable input to your ongoing development. And if you are new to working with TPC, or you're not actually on one of our coach training courses, we really hope this is a worthwhile CPD input for you. So the session this afternoon is on three-way contracting. It's a topic that, especially in the UK, is very front of mind for a lot of organisations who are continually asking to see a return on investment from their spend and investment into executive coaching. I think for L&D managers and HR directors and other people that are responsible for executive coaching panels or internal coaching, this is one of the interventions that can really raise the profile of coaching within your organisation and gain sponsorship from senior leaders. And I will talk more about that in a short while. So the session today, the aims are on the screen in front of you. We're going to spend some time really starting to explore the importance and benefits of three-way contracting. You know, it's a topic that's been discussed in executive coaching for a long time now, but still in the UK we're still not seeing consistently three-way contracting being applied to executive coaching programs. So I do want to talk about the importance and benefits, and through that I'm going to spend some time looking at some key concepts and models that will help you in your thinking and your approach to introducing three-way coaching contracting to your executive coaching programs. And then finally I'll be sharing some of our best practice tips. This is an approach that we use throughout our executive coaching programs as a consultancy, and it's also an aspect that I would always encourage coaches that are training with us to bring more and more into their coaching programs, and I'll explain the reasons for that in a short while. So there are aims for today's session. You will receive a recording of this session afterwards, and there will also be some best practice tips sent on to you by a blog which will arrive by the end of this week as well. If there is time at the end of the session, I will pause for some questions just to try and make this as interactive as possible. If not, I will respond to you personally after the webinar has taken place. So I'm just going to ask you to spend a short space of time just checking in terms of your learning for the session today. The first piece is really about how present you are for this session. So just really spend a couple of moments checking in with yourself around this question. This is both in terms of obviously your energy, but also in terms of your learning for the session as well. How present are you for this? And sort of thinking about that piece, what do you need to do to get the most out of this session? And again, you just may need to just reflect on that for a couple of moments, thinking about perhaps shutting down any applications, or just really start to thinking about what you personally want to get out of this session. Because that's my final question, is really around you investing your time to participate in this webinar, thinking about your experience to date as an executive coach, your current practice. What's your real interest in this topic? You might be holding a question or questions around three-way contracting based on your experiences. So again, just capture some thoughts, just briefly around what you want to take from today's session, just as a way of setting an outcome for your time today. So contracting is I suppose in some ways we always refer to this as the ABC of coaching, always be contracting. So it's the way that we build the container for our work, the conversation that really holds the relational space that we operate in as an executive coach. And on the screen in front of you, you can see a model that some of you will be familiar with. It's one of our models around developing the coaching relationship. And it's just proposing that, as an executive coach, we're always focused on these two aspects, the amount of rapport that we're connecting with our coachee, but also the amount of trust that we're generating as well, both in terms of us as the coach and the relationship and the process of coaching. So by us developing deeper levels of trust and rapport, we create a safe container for the coachee to really develop a deeper sense of self-awareness. We will start to observe more openness in the coachee, and there'll be more disclosure both to themselves and also to us as the coach. And through this process, we can start to describe the coaching as having more of a transformational impact. And by transformation, we mean that the coachee is having a shift in terms of the relationship they have with the topic that they bought for coaching. Without that, if the levels of trust and rapport are low, we can really start to perhaps experience the coaching as more transactional in terms of an everyday type conversation. And that may be the case. Now the reason I'm showing you this model is contracting is a way we start to develop the container, and it's obviously something that we're revisiting every time that we see the coachee. But some executive coaches would challenge the facts that bringing in a third party such as the organisation may impact the environment and this sense of safety that the coachee may be starting to experience with us. So that's something that I want to explore today in terms of whether that's the case or not. Once again, we've seen this year a research project published by the Ashbridge Business School in the UK, which has been studying executive coaching for the past 10 years. And once again, they've determined that it's the relationship that's established between the coach and the client that is the key determiner of success for the intervention. So as an executive coach, how can I bring in an external party in terms of an organisational sponsor and still maintain the relationship and the boundaries such as confidentiality with my client? And again, that's something that we want to explore in the time that we've got this afternoon. So just to get your head back into the space of your practice, I want you to think about one of your coachees that you're working with currently. So I'm just going to ask you to bring them to mind. And just, you can in some ways, just imagine they're sitting in the chair in front of you. Not sure if it looked like the chair on the screen, but again, just spend some time just connecting with them, perhaps the topics that they've been discussing with you, maybe their context and some of the challenges they're facing. Perhaps even connect to the sense of energy you've got about the relationship, thinking about the trust and rapport model. Where are you currently when you think about this client? Is it in the early stages, or do you feel that the trust and rapport have deepened, so you're creating more of a transformational space where they can be open and really start to develop their self-awareness about what's really going on for them? And when you're thinking about this client, the first question I've got, I just want you to capture some thoughts as you reflect on this question, is who is your client? So when you think about this coaching program, whether you're being paid as an executive coach, an external coach, or whether you're operating as an internal coach, really, who is your client that you're working with? And as you're reflecting on this, I'm just going to ask you again, who is really your client, just to see what else emerges for you. And the next question I've got to build on that is, when you think about the coaching program that you're delivering, who is your coaching serving? Who is your coaching serving? I'm just going to get you to just capture a couple of thoughts around that. Who is your coaching serving? The reason I'm starting to ask these questions is, historically, when we think about where coaching has evolved from and how it's been influenced by areas such as counselling, there have been a lot of coaches that have come from more of a therapeutic background. And I would argue, as a result of that, often the client is really being seen as the coachee and not the organisation. And what this meant was a boundary of confidentiality resulted in the fact that coaching was often, and still does, happen behind closed doors. And of course there needs to be confidentiality in there to create the space, but at the same time it's not understandable why the organisations are questioning about the return on investment that they're seeing in coaching, or whether the coaching program and the investment is really meeting their expectations around what they expected to see. And there's a couple of quotes you'll see on the screen which I used in the blog I wrote for this webinar. And I think, over the past 10 years we have seen more and more coaches embracing bringing in a third party to the coaching program. And I think, if you speak to a lot of coaches that have experience of doing this, they will also say that without the inputs of the organisation, it also sometimes can limit the impact of the coaching program, both in terms of the coachee's self-awareness, but at the same time also the support that a coachee is receiving outside of the coaching program. And I just wanted to share with you another concept which is really around leadership derailers, and you can see a quote on there from the Hay Group around this. And working with senior leaders, often there may be aspects of them or the organisation which start to interfere and impact with their growth and performance. So the Hay Group described these either as individual factors or also organisational factors. And I would actually say one of the benefits that I see from introducing three-way contracting conversations into the programs that I facilitate is the fact that often we can raise the coachee's awareness and the organisation's awareness to any of these perhaps blind spots that the coachee may be experiencing. So, in terms of a individual factor that may be impacting on myself as a leader, well, it of course may be a personal weakness. There may be an aspect of myself in my blind spot that I'm not aware of. So personal weakness might be the fact that I'm a perfectionist at some level, and I'm really not aware of the impacts that I'm having on the team and the people around me. And I suppose building on that, more subtle, a derailer might be a strength that I possess as well as a leader. So it's the thing where perhaps too much of a strength can get in the way. So again, if we use the idea of perhaps perfectionism in terms of having high standards for my work, as my role increases, it may get in the way of me actually delivering on time and in a cost-efficient way because I'm demanding such high standards. So of course there can be some personal and individual derailers that I may not be aware of. So again, with the three-way conversation, the organisation can start to raise the coachee's awareness as to what it really needs and expects from them. The other aspect of this, which is often overlooked in organisations, are the organisational factors that could derail a coachee's career. So the first one is really linked to the individual factors. The organisation may not be making the coachee aware of perceived strengths because the coachee is still delivering, as they may be overlooking a perceived weakness. And again, a three-way contracting conversation may be a way to stimulate awareness around that. There's also a piece around abdicating responsibility that could derail the coachee. So often an organisation may feel that its responsibility ends once it's identified the coach to work with the coachee. So in a way they abdicate the responsibility to the coach and ask them to take that on in terms of the coachee and the success of the coaching program. And again, a way of, I suppose, leveling that and making sure it's not happening is three-way contracting conversations. And then another two that we sometimes see in organisations, especially when the leader is in transition. The first is assuming the new leader will be successful in the new role because they've been successful before. So again, the organisation is not taking into account the responsibility it has, or perhaps it's even the line manager, in really setting the leader's expectations of what's required. And again, a three-way contracting conversation can be a way of doing that. And then the final piece, again, sometimes for new leaders who've joined an organisation, is the organisation sometimes doesn't help the coachee understand the cultural expectations in terms of what needs to happen to be delivered. So an example of this may be the leader may have quite an affiliative leadership style when the culture in the organisation is very hierarchical in terms of the way things are done. So again, the leader may start to derail, and a three-way contracting conversation is really a way that we can facilitate effective expectation settings, both in terms of the coachee and the organisation, and then also feedback in terms of what the line requires of the coachee, but also what the coachee requires of the line. So it's a way that we can start really raising awareness to potential derailers, but for both the coachee and the organisation. In terms of this whole concept, about 10 years ago I was really curious about what was really playing out in organisations around three-way contracting. So I just want to share some research with you. The first piece of research was conversations I had with 20 organisations in the UK. So these were large blue chip organisations that provided coaching and had been working with coaches for at least 10 years supporting their leaders. And what we actually found was that it was only 50% of the organisations insisted on three-way contracting conversations. And you can see on the left-hand side the reported reasons why the organisations thought three-way contracting was a useful intervention. And then on the right-hand side you can see for the 50% of organisations that weren't using three-way contracting, the reasons why they didn't do that. And you can sort of link it back to some of what I was just talking about in terms of the organisational responsibility. Seeing that the executives are trusted, respecting confidentiality, etc. Compared to on the left-hand side, where you start to see the wider, I suppose, value of three-way contracting. And from experiences that we have with a lot of our clients developing coaching cultures, this is the one intervention that really raises the sponsorship of coaching in the organisation, because the senior teams are involved in the three-way meetings and therefore really start to see the value and the impact of coaching on their direct reports. So it does have more organisational impact than just helping the one-to-one coaching program be successful. So that's the first lens I just wanted to share with you. The second lens is actually a group of coaches that we looked at. So again, these coaches have been practicing for at least 10 years. And there was 25 executive coaches that we actually carried out some evaluation with to actually see if they were completing three-way contracting with their clients. And again, what we saw was 2/3 of the executive coaches did as much as possible. So 66% said that they were completing three-way contracting. And from the coaches that were doing this, again, these were some of the results we saw in terms of what they were saying was the positive impact from three-way contracting compared to some of the negative impacts. So I'm just going to give you a couple of moments just to read some of those. And what I would say around the coaches that weren't completing three-way contracting, their main reason for not completing this was due to confidentiality boundaries. And going back to our first conversation around imagining your client in the chair, it really came down to seeing the coachee as the client and not the organisation that was paying the bill. So you can sort of see there's some real value that the coaches were getting from three-way contracting. Some other research that I completed around about 5 years ago, I went into an organisation that had been using coaching for around about 15 years, and they had a talent development program for executives where coaching formed an integral part of that. So they undertook 6 one-to-one coaching sessions, and they also had three-way contracting at the front of the coaching program, and then they had a three-way meeting at the end to review the success of the coaching program. And this is really what the coachees reported, and I spoke to them a year after they had finished the leadership program. 100% of them said that the three-way contracting was one of the most vital ingredients to the coaching program. And what I heard most often was it was one of the most honest conversations they had ever had with their line manager in terms of transparency around expectations, but also it gave them an opportunity to really request the support they required in terms of their career and personal development as well. So they found that the coach facilitating that was a very, very effective intervention. So that was the coachee's perspective. Again, I spoke to the line managers of the 18 participants as well. And again, 100% of them reported that it was an effective process and that they would always recommend that this takes place with any future coaching programs for their teams. So again, they refer to areas such as it was, open and an honest conversation, really helping the coachee take the most out of the coaching program. And they felt that they were able to report back and input into the program over time, so they were able to evaluate and give feedback around the changes that they were seeing. So overall, they found they were getting better value for money from the one-to-one coaching. So that's just some research to share with you around, I suppose, three-way contracting in practice. I just want to talk about some useful frameworks now when thinking about approaching this. So when we think about contracting, we always talk about contracting having 3 elements. So it's sort of forming the working alliance around what we want to get from the coaching program, so the objectives for the number of sessions that we're working with the coachee linked to obviously business priorities. We then have the psychological contract, which is really around our expectations of each other in terms of how we work together. So maybe areas such as my previous experience of being coached as a coachee, and therefore what I really need from the coach to make it more effective this time. And some of that may never be said unless the coach is able to facilitate an effective coaching contracting session. And then the final aspect is the process and logistics. So if we take a scenario such as you are invited in to work with a senior leader in an organisation, you've been contacted by the HR business partner who has told you that one of the exec members aren't happy with the performance of the senior leader and have spoken to the individual's line manager who's contacted HR, and they are now contacting you to see if it would be possible to arrange one-to-one coaching program for the individual. next step is usually that we arrange to see them for a chemistry and contracting session. And we could view the situation like this, that the coachee is the client and we need to establish a contract with them. When we think about it, though, from a more systemic perspective, there are many dynamics and influences in terms of, I suppose, the outcome of the coaching program, both in terms of what's going on for the individual, the team that they're part of, the organisation, and the wider environment. And often coaches don't see that firsthand because they're not necessarily consulting with the organisation for any depth before we're getting into the one-to-one coaching work. Another way of looking at that is more of a systemic view around the different contracts that are actually present in terms of this coaching program. And when we think about it, there are actually 8 different contracts, especially around the psychological contracts and the expectations out of the coaching program. So outside of just the coach and the coachee, we've got the HR business partner, the line manager, and the executive. Everybody's got requirements and expectations around what they're requiring to see. And the reason there's an iceberg on the screen underneath these different people is the fact that psychological contracting, it's like trying to raise up to awareness what's below the waterline. And how can we facilitate an effective conversation where these different perspectives and requirements for the outcome of the coaching can clearly be discussed. And that's where the benefit of having a one-to-one coaching client going through a 3-way contracting program is so effective. So, whilst on face value we can just see that we need to contract with the coachee, it's not true. There are different organisational perspectives that we really need to take into account. And building on that, I just wanted to introduce a model which I like around this, which is called psychological distance. And what we mean by that is the perceived distance in terms of the relationships that exist between the different parties involved in the coaching program. And for simplicity, I've just put the different parties under organisation outside of the coach and the coachee. So what this model is proposing is, in a healthy coaching program, the sides of the contract triangle are all the same. The psychological length, and what that really confirms, is the degrees of closeness between the parties in terms of the relationships. So they should all be the same length as much as possible. So I'm just going to ask you just to reflect for a couple of moments and perhaps bring back to mind that coachee that you put in the chair earlier. And just thinking about this model, how would you draw the triangle to represent the relationship in terms of the closeness between you and the coachee, and you and the organisation, and the coachee and the organisation? So if you just quickly draw that triangle, you may just want to spend a couple of moments just thinking around if this is identifying anything you need to be aware of in terms of the relationship. What might be present or what might be missing. And again, this is a model that I use with a lot of my supervisees that I work with as a coach supervisor to really help them think about some of the contracting issues and dilemmas that they're facing. Because if any party feels the triangle is out of balance, it generally will raise issues in terms of the success of the coaching program. And I would even generalize to say that, a lot of my supervision work is really helping coaches think around aspects of the contract that haven't been made clear, and especially the psychological contract with the coachee and the organisation. So if we go back to that scenario I just introduced you to, when we're thinking about going into work with this senior leader, if, for instance, you take a call from the HR business partner, and the HR business partner is briefing you about the coachee, telling you what they've been told by the coachee's line manager around the performance, Metaphorically, the distance between you and the organisation is decreasing at that point. What then might happen is you may speak to the line manager individually. Perhaps the HR business partner has asked you to have a quick call with them. And during that call, the line manager again talks to you about the context, explains to you that perhaps the exec member really is not happy with the performance, and the coachee is at risk of being moved out the organisation, but they haven't told the coachee that yet. So in a way, they're sharing information with you. They're asking you to treat that as confidential, and it's really sort of one of those ethical dilemmas in terms of what we face as a coach. Because at that point, we could start the coaching work. And as the diagram is trying to portray, the psychological distance between myself and the organisation is now a lot closer than it is to the coachee. So at some level, the coachee may be experiencing that. Maybe not consciously, but unconsciously they'll be aware at some level of what may have been discussed beforehand. So again, three-way contracting is a way to really level the playing field as much as possible. To look at it a different way, again, a different scenario that we could reflect on for a moment is, imagine you've worked with a leader previously who've now accepted a role in a new organisation. So they're in a transition situation, and the leader calls you and sort of says to you that they would really require an executive coaching program. They've worked with you before, and so they would like to re-engage you. Also, their new manager is really happy to fund the coaching program as well, because they feel development intervention for the leader as they join the organisation. And you then meet with a coachee to discuss the contracting and program goals. And again, the coachee is saying that we don't need to involve the line manager because they're happy to pay. They really value coaching, and they're happy with the areas that the coachee is identifying. So at that point, we could look at this from another way. The distance between the coach and the coachee starts to shorten, so we're out of balance with the organisation. And then perhaps as the coaching program continues, the coachee then starts to tell you that it's actually the line manager that's causing the problems as far as they're concerned, and they would like to really work on as well their relationship with their line manager. And of course, this is all valuable areas to focus on in coaching. But what we need to think about, again, is the psychological distance, because in either example, you could say that there's an aspect of collusion going on between the coach and the organisation, or the coach and the coachee. And what we're always trying to do with our contracting processes is ensure that there's an equal distance between these three parties as much as possible. And it's not always possible to have a three-way contracting conversation. I appreciate that, either due to costs or to time pressures, and I'll come back and talk about that a bit later. But I suppose the key thing is, in terms of your awareness and your practice, as you're starting to think about some challenges or some dilemmas you're facing in terms of either information that's being revealed to you or the boundaries of confidentiality, etc., it's really going back to this model and thinking about where is the balance and what might that be telling you. Another way of looking at some of the dynamics that potentially could play out in a coaching program is through the lens of Stephen Cartman's drama triangle, which you may be familiar with. It comes from transactional analysis and was developed by Cartman in the 1970s. Now, we have done a separate webinar on the drama triangle, but just very briefly, the model sort of proposes there may be three roles that we could get involved in an unconscious game with a coachee. So at the bottom of the triangle, you see the role of the victim. So a victim in terms of a coaching program may be a coachee that's not accepting responsibility for their vulnerability. So they're not taking ownership of their vulnerability, and are actually looking for somebody else to help them out of the situation and in a way rescue them. So that may be a pattern of behavior that they've got. You may hear them talk the yes but game, yes, but I've tried that and that doesn't work. So we may have somebody that's playing a victim. The role of the rescuer can be briefly described as somebody that's generally taking responsibility for the coachee. So I suppose a sign in a coaching program may be that you're doing more than 50% of the work. You may be offering help when it hasn't been asked for, and you may be working outside of the coaching contract as well, so doing additional activities. And the final role is the role of the persecutor. The role of the persecutor is somebody that's really not taking responsibility for their power and authority in a situation. And the reason I'm briefly introducing this as a framework is, again, when we go into work with a coachee, at some level we're being set up to be a rescuer. And again, the reason the contracting is so important is because we're looking to level the playing field. We're looking to level any power dynamics that may be playing out with the coachee involved, and protecting ourselves as much as possible to really try and ensure the coaching program is as successful as possible. So how do we do this? Well, the way that we would generally work is that the contracting will take place between the coach and the coachee initially. And during the initial conversation, of course, we're working on chemistry, we're starting to create the relationship, we're thinking about those three areas that we contract around. So the first of those is the goals for the program and the objectives for the program. So what we'll be asking the coachee to do is to identify the public goals for the coaching program. And what we mean by public goals are the goals that will be shared with the sponsor for the coaching process. And that may be the line manager, it could always be perhaps the HR business partner or director with the line manager. Perhaps there's a difficult relationship with the coachee that needs to be worked on. So the coach and the coachee will agree public goals, and they will also agree some private goals that will remain confidential to them between the coach and the coachee. And that's the way that we can work on areas that the coachee doesn't necessarily want to express to the organisation. I think it's important that the coach takes responsibility to ensure that the private goals do still relate to the business objectives and the role of the coachee. At the end of the day, we're not doing counselling, so even if somebody is working on perhaps something stress related, it's always in relation to their business performance and their business role. So we will ask the coachee to scope public goals and some private goals. Now, the other aspect that's vital that we discussed earlier is around the psychological contract. So at the next session, at session 2, or it may be the first session after contracting, for 30 minutes we ask the sponsor to arrive. That may be the line manager, may be the HR business partner. And we ask them to attend the meeting for 30 minutes. And that may be by phone, it may be face-to-face if that's possible, maybe by a video conference. And during that 30 minutes, we'll discuss and agree the public goals, but then we'll also talk about how we're going to work together, so the psychological contracts and the expectations of each other as well. So, for example, an aspect may be how will the sponsor or line manager be kept updated around the coaching program, and we'd always recommend that the coachee does that so they own it. We'll facilitate a conversation between the coachee and the sponsor in terms of the areas the sponsor wants the coachee to work on and the reasons for that. So an opportunity for them to give them some feedback around how they're experienced. We'll also facilitate a conversation between the coachee and the sponsor in terms of the support that the coachee requires from the line manager. So all the time we're trying to surface what potentially won't be said if this three-way contract doesn't happen. So for 30 minutes the line manager will join, and then what we can do is really just encourage all parties to try and be as open as possible during the conversation so they fully engage in the psychological contracting process as well as the public goals for the program. And then after the 30 minutes, the line manager or sponsor can leave, and as a coach, I can then spend some time with the coachee debriefing the conversation and revisiting the private goals that we've established for the program to see if anything else has emerged that the coachee now wants to focus on as a result of the three-way goal setting conversation. So in terms of our recommended approach and hints and tips to do this, you know, as a coach, you may need to work with the HR area or the sponsor, really about gaining, I suppose, the profile of why this is important for the senior leaders to engage in terms of three-way contracting. Because as I said, they may see that their role finishes once they've agreed to sign off the budget. But as you've sort of seen from some of the feedback that we've received from those managers, it's a really important conversation and part of the coaching program. So we do have responsibility to educate the line manager, the coachee, and that may mean that we need to prepare the coachee and the sponsor stroke line manager before the three-way conversations as well. As part of my contracting conversations, when we're talking about three-way, I will always discuss with the coachee around how they need to approach that conversation to get the most out of it, a conversation around hopes and fears, etc. So we're going to sort of set the three-way meeting to happen after the initial session with the coachee where we're talking about contracting. And then, you know, between the contracting session and the three-way conversation, the coachee can always take the public goals and share those with the line manager or sponsor. So they can always have a conversation outside of the three-way conversation to agree the public goals in a bit more detail before you meet them. And again, by doing that, you're really asking them to take more and more responsibility for that. You know, you do need to work in terms of really facilitating the conversation. So the coachee and the line manager can speak what they really need to speak. So you may need to agree some ground rules for how they work during that meeting. You know, as I said earlier, you may need to prepare them for the conversation as well. Post the three-way discussion, as I said, the coachee can review the private goals in terms of what they want to achieve. And I think, you know, it's really important that the line understand that the private goals remain confidential. But again, you know, we always insist that they relate to the business goals of the coachee. So in terms of templates, you know, we have templates that we use, so we can really set out the private goals and public goals that are required for the coaching program. And again, the public goals can then be shared with the sponsor stroke line manager, and at the end of the program in session 6 for half an hour the line manager or sponsor comes back into the program and we have a three-way conversation to debrief the process. So there are templates out there on the web that you can see. If anybody would like a copy of our templates, I'm happy to send them over. If you send us an email to copy in, it's really just all about having a transparency around what's really required. So that's the process. Final thing I'll just say is, you know, it's not always possible to have a three-way contracting conversation. But I suppose it's really vital that as a coach, we're really putting on the glasses around who the client is. And even if we're having a one-to-one contracting conversation with the coachee only, we're still bringing in the lenses of the organisation and the public goals that need to be required and need to be met by the coaching program. So facilitating a conversation with the coachee around what the organisation wants the coachee to achieve from the coaching, and again scoping out some public goals in case there is a question raised around the coaching program. So then we've got some goals that can be shared with the sponsor or the line. And again, I would always ask the coachee to scope those goals out and to write those up on the templates. So it may not always happen, but really important that as coaches we take responsibility to ensure that we bring the organisation more explicitly into the contract in terms of the goals and what's required. So I'm conscious we're running out of time. So maybe just reflecting on this conversation and what I've shared with you, just perhaps reflect on what's the one insight or learning you're taking away from this coaching webinar, and what's one immediate action that you want to put into practice. So what's one learning and what's one action for you in your coaching practice? And the final thing to share with you is our next webinar is taking place on the 9th of March. So this is really for people that have trained with us on our European Mentoring and Coaching Council qualification, which is the practitioner level, who may be interested in converting from their EQA status to the individual award status. So that webinar will be taking place on the 9th of March at 2 o'clock, and that will be with myself and Michelle Crossland from the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. So thanks for making the time today. I hope you found that a valuable session, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.